Sit. I was a bit apprehensive when I undertook a trip to Morocco using local transportation, no organized tour. Morocco is located just south of Spain and the Straits of Gibraltar. The country has extremes in geography, a long coastline, rugged mountains, and great deserts. My trip started with a ferry from Gibraltar to Tangier, Morocco. Then I took a local train to the fascinating city of Fez. In Fez, I rented a car and drove over the mountains in to El Rashida, and then drove on to the desert village of Rassani. In Rassani, I drove the car to Ouarzizate, where I dropped the car off and took a local bus over the mountains to Marrakesh. From Marrakesh, I took an overnight train back to Tangier and Gibraltar. So, in just a few days on the ground, I visited a large variety of territory within the exotic country of Morocco. So, my trip began in Gibraltar, where I caught a ferry to Tangier. From there, a train took me through the agricultural areas of Morocco. I saw many people who dressed differently from me. Finally, the train entered the outskirts of the imperial city of Fez. There are three parts to the city of Fez. The oldest part, the so-called Old Fes, was of the most interest to me. The Medina, or Kasbah, in Old Fez is one of the largest living medieval cities in the world and the most interesting in Morocco. Several of us hired a local guide to take us through the maze of small passageways and narrow winding alleys to see the important sights of Old Fez. The first of these sites that we visited, after climbing upstairs to a rooftop observation platform, were the famous Tanneries of Fez. This platform overlooked the tanners' pits. The pits are awash in colors used for tanning and dyeing the leather. The smell up here was something to experience. However, it was fascinating to watch the workers wash, color, and lay the skins out to dry in the sun. When we went to leave the area, of course, you have to pass through a shop where they sell their large variety of leather goods. They never miss an opportunity to sell something to us. Then we walked back down the narrow stairway to the street level and the street activity. Fortunately, our guide lived here and knew where he was going. I would have been lost quickly. One thing I learned is that donkeys have the right of way on narrow alleys. No motorized transport is allowed inside the Medina. Different parts of Old Fez contained different craft specializations. Here we were taken to an area where beautiful fabrics were created by use of handmade looms. This one was assembled using bamboo poles. The fabrics they created were gorgeous. Back out on the alleyways, we passed all kinds of small businesses. Down one alley, there was a vendor selling fresh fruit and vegetables. In another, you'd see chickens. On another, a furnace heating water for Turkish baths. There are a number of important religious sites. Some of these have very ornate artwork on the outside. Many of the religious sites did not allow anyone to enter except Muslims. One way people greet friends is by cheek touching. This is a schoolroom. A class is in progress. This is the largest mosque in North Africa. It can hold over 20,000 people. It's called the Kerarina Mosque. It's also part of a university, and the university has a very large library of books. Then it's back to walking the narrow passageways of the Kasbah. Now, Old Fez has about 10,000 streets. On special occasions, like weddings, ladies paint their hands in a special way. One of the mandatory stops in any tour is the carpet sales room. Gorgeous hand-created rugs. The salesman makes sure you've seen any possible rug you might like to buy. Another popular stop is the shop that sells different natural material, perfumes, substances, spices, and it has an unbelievable variety. The man tells us that he can cure any health problem we have with his chemicals. These narrow, winding alleys and covered bazaars are crammed with every conceivable sort of craft, workshop, restaurant, meat, fruit, vegetable, market, as well as mosques and maderas and dye pits and tanneries. I rented a car in Fez, then drove south, climbing. The car passed through large tracts of grazing land as the road went up toward the mountains. In the mountains, I passed several saddles at about 6,000 feet elevation. Then I was on a high, flat plateau. One of the sections of the drive was called the Z's Gorges. The high, colorful, steep walls on the side of the gorge are eye-catching. There are many small towns located along the banks of the river. The water from the river is used by the towns for agriculture. The buildings look to have been constructed with adobe. Farther south, I was surprised to see camels out in the wild, grazing, unattended. But then, I don't know anything about camel husbandry. Could they be wild camels? In the distance, you can see sand dunes. That's the objective today. I stopped for the night at a town called El Rashid, just on the outskirts of the desert. I picked up a guide to be with me for 2 days, and he insisted on stopping at a souvenir shop where they tried to sell me some desert artifacts. The first interesting stop the guide made was at a Bedouin camp. This is basically the living room and sleeping quarters.
Huh?
Out there is the kitchen. Children are the same everywhere. Back in the car, we headed farther south toward the great desert. We encountered more camels. The road became more and more desert-like. The surface of the ground is a combination of sand and rocks. Soon I couldn't see any landmarks, only the flat land, and car tracks going in all directions. I'm sure glad I had a guide with me. Finally, we did see a tree out in the middle of nowhere and got under its shade to eat a picnic lunch out of the sun. Back driving across the desert. No road signs. Is that water up ahead or a mirage? This land looks as if it's been tilled by a huge harrow. I sure hope this guide knows where he's going. It was water. And look at the giant sand dunes behind the water. And donkeys. I don't know what they're eating. The lake dries up later in the summer. We passed by several small villages scattered out here in the desert. This one is called Mirzuga, and it's at the edge of the erg. The houses are constructed of adobe. That night, we spent in a walled albergue near the sand dunes. Our guide got some locals to pick up some drums, and they played for us. I couldn't tell if they were playing a tune or just banging for the fun of it. In the morning, I was up early to catch the sun at a low angle over the sand dunes. There had been a light wind during the night that had erased the footprints from the day before. This is the Erg Chebi. This is Morocco's only genuine Sahara erg, one of those huge, drifting expanses of sand dunes that typify much of the Algerian desert. Before the sun was fully up, I walked back to the car and we drove to the town of Rossini and visited its somewhat small Kasbah. I got the help of a local guide. You'll notice the wide gutter down the middle of the passageway. That's where the donkeys walk. And every so often they pour large quantities of water down this gutter, which cleans the gutter of the donkey waste.
Here is the mosque of the people make the prayer, and there is the small madrasa, the Quran school.
These covered passageways are cool during the hot summer days.
This is always it's open like this for a little bit the light.
About 1,000 people live in this Casbah. But then there was the mandatory stop at souvenir shops. This shop specialized in ceramics, and then it was on to the rug sales room. The local guide told us about the different designs. This is a piece of luggage carried on camels. The rugs were beautiful and handmade. I'm sure they were of great quality. Well, it was time to leave the desert towns and my local desert guide. I headed west toward Ouarzazate. I made a short detour north to view Morocco's finest natural wonder, the Gorges du Tadra. The gorges, or canyons, have a very narrow bottom and vertical walls which are about 1,000 feet above the valley floor. I liked this place, except it was infested with people hustling for money, and there were lots of tourists. This is a typical highway. Look at that car in front of me. The car is almost as wide as the paved part of the highway. Now, when I met a car coming in the opposite direction, I had to drive halfway off the highway to avoid a collision. I found I couldn't book a seat on a local bus the day I arrived in Ouarzazate, so I had to overnight. One of the primary interests to me in Morocco were the people. The actual town of Ouarzazate was of very little interest to me. It's mostly a stopover point between major destinations. The next day was devoted primarily to a ride on a local bus up over the Atlas Mountains and down to Marrakesh. There was snow on the Atlas Mountains. The drive with the narrow switchbacks was harrowing. The best part of the bus trip was the rest stop 2.5 hours into the drive. Besides the challenge of trying to find a clean public bathroom, I enjoyed watching the activity on the street of this little town. Again, donkeys were a very popular means of locomotion. My half day in Marrakesh was spent cleaning up and preparing for an all-night train ride in a compartment with 6 bunk beds, 3 high on each side of the compartment. I was very happy to get to Tangier and the ferry back to Gibraltar.